Shavuos Edis. We're up to Daf Lamed Amid Aleph, the very top of the page. So we're learning the different kinds of Shavuos that there are. We learned that there's a Shavuos Bitui, a Shavuos that you express about the future, or according to Rabbi Shmuel, also according to Kiva, about the past. And if you did it b'shoigig, you bring a specific kind of a carbon known as oile v'yoded, commensurate to financial status. And then we also learned the concept of a Shavuos Shav, an argument between Talmud Bavli and Yerushalmi what exactly Shavuos Shav is. Whether Shavuos Shav is like in our Mishnah here, it says that you wanted to change an obvious fact. You swear that a pillar of stone is a pillar of gold. That's a Shavuos Shav, a Shavuos vain, because everyone knows it's wrong. Or the other opinion, that Shavuos Shav also includes a wasted Shavuos, a waste of words. I swear that this pillar of stone is a pillar of stone. Everyone knows that. It's obvious. So you're saying something which is useless. Now we're introducing the third kind of a Shavuos called Shavuos Edis, where somebody knows testimony, asked by the plaintiff to please swear on my behalf, and they say we have no. We don't have the ability to swear because we don't know what happened. We can't give you edus. Sorry, we don't know what actually happened. And so they deny that they can give edus. Later on, they admit that they lied. That's called Shavuos Edis. So we learned that a number of differences between Shavuos Edis and the other Shavuos. The other Shavuos is no difference what gender you are. It makes no difference whether it's about you're going to give to your relatives or to distant people. It makes absolutely no difference. It doesn't matter whether you're qualified to be a witness, you're not qualified to be a witness. It doesn't matter whether it happened in front of a bezin or outside of a bezin. It's all the same. When it comes to Shavuos Edis, it's very different. It only applies to people that they could have gone to bezin. Had they gone to bezin, we would have accepted their testimony. So now you harmed this individual by not coming forward. So therefore, only applies to people who are qualified to be Eidim, so men and not women. Only about foreign strangers, not about relatives, because you cannot testify about a relative, and only in front of a bezin, and so on. Another difference is that the other two Shavuos are only if you did it b'shoigig. If you by mistake made the Shavuos bita, you didn't keep it, you promised to eat bread and you didn't eat it, okay. So then you bring the carbon oil v'yoded. If you did it deliberately, you'll get malchus. If you're warned, you'll get malchus. By Shavuos Edis, it's if even you knew you were lying, you knew that you had testimony to share, but you refused to divulge it. You're amazed. Then still you bring a carbon oil v'yoded. And if it's a shoigig mixed with a mazid, as we'll soon see, and the Mishnah will talk about in the Gemara, that is, you knew that you were lying, but you didn't realize that you have to bring a carbon in that instance. Or you didn't even realize it's an Avera. You knew that you had testimony, but you didn't know that you have to get involved. You want to stay on the sidelines. You want to get involved in the machlekes. There also, the din is you bring a carbon. But if you were a shaygig, you thought you had no testimony to offer. And then later on you realize that you did. For that, you don't bring a carbon. So exactly the opposite of the other one. So the Mishnah, the new Perek. Shavuos Edis, a Shavuos of witnesses, Noheges ba'anoshim is only applicable to men and not women, because the rule is had they said the testimony in Bezin, they would have been accepted. So it has to be people who are accepted for testimony. All the Rishonim talk about over here, and Gemara Nida, Gemara Baba Kama, and that is that the rule is whoever is qualified to be a judge is qualified to be a witness, which means that, let's say, Noshim, as we'll soon see how we know, are not qualified to be witnesses, they cannot be judges. So how is Devora a judge? It says, she was judging. How? And the different answers given. One of the answers is given that she didn't actually judge. She told everybody the rules, and then the Dayan came in and used those rules to judge. Others say that different, because Hashem said that you have to, that she is appointed as to be the shofetes, and therefore she is able to judge. Others say that the Eden were makabel, they all accepted her to be the leader, and therefore that's different. However, the Chidah writes in Siman Zayin and Choshen Mishpat that that women definitely can become a Rav, even though maybe a Dayan is different, but it comes to a Rav and Paschal, they definitely can, which is pretty revolutionary. But let's continue the Mishnah. So, okay, it only applies to strangers and not to relatives, because you can't give testimony on behalf of your relatives. The those are kosher to be witnesses, not those who are disqualified. Only by those who are suitable to testify. Now we just said that. Why is the mission repeated? So we're going to learn later in the Gemara. It's coming to exclude a king, for example. King can be a witness, but halachically a king cannot be called to the witness stand because it's not the covet of a king. So therefore, he's not a ruyin lahayid. Bifnei bezin. According to this view, Rab Meir, whether it's in front of a bezin, whether it's not in front of a bezin, mipi atzmai. There's two ways that a Shavuos Eidus.
You think that just started?
There's two ways by Shavuos Eidus. One way of Shavuos Eidus is where they come forward and say, they swear, we have no testimony, we have nothing to help you out with. The other way is called Mujma B'Piachedim, where the plaintiff says, swear, you have to swear, and I want you to come forward and testify on my behalf. And they say, we have nothing to say. And he says, Mashbiachani, I'm making you swear that you don't have anything to say. And they say, they say, Amen. It's as if they made a shur. Well, we learned that before. Or if they are quiet, they don't say anything. So in that case, it's as if they are denying that they have anything to say. That's called a pi achedim. And the pasuk actually talks about. It says here that they heard koil olah, which is talking about mujma pi achedim. So the very pasuk that introduces this idea that edim, if they swear that they cannot, they have nothing to offer, they have no testimony to give, and they later admit that they lied, is talking about mujma pi achedim. They heard koil olah, they heard somebody say mashbeachani, I'm making you swear that you have nothing to help me with. And so that's called mushbeh chedim. How do we know that mashbeh pe'atzmai? How do you know that they step forward themselves and they say, look, we swear we can't really help you. We weren't there. We have no idea what you're talking about. Whether they're also involved in this carbon oil or not, we'll see in the Gemara later. So according to Rab Meir, there's a difference between mepeh atzmai or mepeh chedim. The pasuk is talking about mepeh chedim, so therefore it has to be in front of a bezin. How do we know the pasuk is talking about in front of a bezin? Abaye is later on going to say, is talking about in front of a bezin because it says in the pasuk, "Ve'im lo yagid v'nasavoin." If he refuses to reveal or to come forward and give a testimony, then he's carrying a sin. That means he's testimony in a place where the testimony will be accepted and have an impact. And that's only in front of a bezin. So the mujma piachedim can only take place in front of a bezin, and then he admits it. You be carbon oil. When it comes to mujma piatzmai, it's questionable. In fact, it's an argument Ramei Chachamim whether also it's only in front of a bezin or even outside of a bezin. If they come forward and they swear to the plaintiff, don't bother subpoenaing us to the bezin. We swear we have nothing to say. In that case, there they bring a carbon oil as well, according to Ramei. So we'll start again here. So the Gemara. Bifnei bezin ushalei. We're in the Mishnah, 4 lines on the top. Bifnei bezin ushalei. Bifnei bezin is mipiatzmai. If they've come forward and make a shur, it makes no difference where it took place. If they were asked to, the plaintiff says, "I make you swear," but I'm making you swear that you don't have any testimony for me. Then it only takes place in the bezin because that's what the pasuk is talking about. Now, Chachamim say it makes no difference. They don't have to bring this carbon oil unless they deny it in front of a bezin. The Gemara later on will explain what's the crux of their argument. And then the Mishnah continues. And here it's this Shavuos Ha'edus is different in contrast to the other Shavuos Bitui and Shavuos Shav. Because there it only takes place if it's a Shaygig. It says Venelim, you forgot that they were tummy, walked in, same thing here. Venelim, you forgot that he made a Shavuos. But over here, it doesn't say Venelim. So the Chayavin al Zadin Shavuos, they knew at the time that they swore they have no testimony, that they're lying, that's when they bring a carbon oil. Or if they knew they were lying, but there was a shaygig involved, they thought you don't bring a carbon for this, or they thought it's not even a vera. Who said I have to go just because I know some testimony? I have to go and offer it in the bezin. I have to get subpoenaed and everything. I have to be interrogated. I'm not interested. They didn't know that. That's sufficient shaygig to be combined with amazing that they bring a carbon out of the yid. But if there's a pure shaygig, they don't have to bring a carbon oil. They thought that they had no testimony to offer, and then turned out to be they did. They don't bring a carbon oil. What is their chiyuv? We said that the chayiv bebezit carbon oil. So this is the third kind of shur that chayiv covered. First of all, Question is, how do you know that women are postulated? Says the Gemara, I'll tell you how we know. We'll have a few brises saying more or less the same thing. The Torah we learned. It says in the pasuk that the two men should stand up. The pasuk says it's important. The two people should stand up. That have a dispute, and they stand before Hashem in front of a bezin. It's if you read the pasuk, it sounds like we're talking about the plaintiff and the defendant. They should be standing when they're standing and giving their case in front of the bezin. They should be standing. Or when the Gemara, however, says the first words "va'amdu shnei anoshim" is not referring to the plaintiff and defendant, but actually it's referring to the Aiden themselves. So the Gemara of Aiden, because we're talking about the witnesses. After talking about the witnesses, the Baal and maybe he's talking about the plaintiff and the defendant. Then the pasuk says Asher lehem ariv. We're going to learn now. It's a separate group of people. So the two groups of people there. There's the Anoshim, and the other group of people is Asher lehem ariv. So Asher lehem ariv is the plaintiff and defendant, the protagonists. So who's left? The Anoshim must be the witnesses. That they. So it says Anoshim men. So we say men and not women. Hadi Baladin number is talking about Baladin. The witnesses. You can ask me a question. What exactly is the question the Gemara is going to discuss in a minute? No, but I'll give you a second answer. It says over here Shnei. It says Amdu Shnei Anoshim. The Nemel Halon later on it says Apishnei Edim Yakum Dover. It says a Shnei. Is Malahalon Be'edim talking about the witnesses. So when it says here Amdu Shnei Anoshim, because of the Zer Shavah, we'll say we're talking about the witnesses. Avkan Be'edim witnesses. Says the Gemara, explain the Braisa. My im nafshachlem. What question could you possibly have that the Braisa says if you have a question, this is the answer I will give you? Because this is a question we can have. The Chitayim, you're going to say Midaloi Kasev. If you're telling me that it's talking about two different groups of people, Shnei Anoshim is one group of people. Asher Hemriv is another group of people. My question is, if the pasuk would have said with a vav, the Asher Hemriv, I would say we're talking about two different groups of people. By saying Shnei Hanoshim, Asher, without the vav, it sounds like the pasuk is saying these two people who happen to have the dispute. We're not talking about two different groups of people, they're the same group. So the Gemara says, I'll allow for that, but I'll give you another basis for that we're talking about Adim, because it says maybe it's talking about Baladin. So we know we're talking about Edim, and it says Anoshim. The pasuk could have said Va'amnu Shnei Edim. Let the two witnesses stand up. Why does it say Shnei Anoshim? Brisa number 2. Similar but different kind of questions. Tani go no Brisa. Va'amnu Shnei Anoshim. Edim. We're talking about witnesses, and it has to be Anoshim. Witnesses ain't no Baladin. Maybe talking about the protagonist. So I'll tell you, it can be talking about it's Shnei Edim. What in a case you only have, what if you have two plaintiffs or one plaintiff and three defendants? Why does it title limited to Shnei? What's the relevance of Shnei? So it must be we're talking about in a case where we're talking about witnesses. Now, even though the Rishonim say you can have more than two witnesses, but generally speaking, a plaintiff will go out looking or a defendant looking for witnesses to support their side. All they look for is two, because two is sufficient. What you only have two people, two disputants, you don't have three. Now, if you can ask me a question, I will answer you. It says Shnei Edim 2. The Nemah Shnei says it says Shnei Anoshim says the other place Shnei Edim. Malahal Be'edim Kabedim. According to this Brisa, what possible question do you have? Because the Chitema, you can come back to me and say, but you want to know why it says Shnei? He's not talking about witnesses, he's talking about the plaintiff and defendant, but he's saying there's two categories, two groups of people. There are plaintiffs, I don't care if it's 1 or 100, and there are defendants, I don't care if it's 1 in 100. So therefore, I would assume that Shnei Anoshim is a part of the Hashem Hemriv. We're talking about the plaintiff and the defendant. I says two because of two categories. That's why I'll tell you how I know we're talking about witnesses. Never can Shnei, never have Shnei. Mal Halam Be'edim, I've come Be'edim, no witnesses. Tani the third Brisa. We're talking about witnesses and anoshim v'lo anoshim. Witnesses are maybe we're talking about the disputants. I'll tell you. Why does it say anoshim? Only if we're talking about the tevei and the nitva, the plaintiff and the defendant, it could be anybody. Just like men have disputes, so women also have disputes. Why highlight? Why accentuate the fact that it's anoshim? If you have that question, we'll soon see what question you have. Just like over there, we know Shnei means witnesses. So when it says here, we're talking about witnesses. What question would you have? You tell me, you'll say, you want to know why it says Anoshim? Because generally speaking, Isha Lav Urcha, women didn't go into business, or therefore they didn't have all these kind of disputes. Because Shemkol Kavuda Basmela Prima, the honor of a princess is to be in at home, and therefore they weren't really in business that much. And therefore, of course, they weren't in business that much. Maybe that's why the Torah is telling you how things generally work. Usually, who came to court? Who's fighting? Men. So that's why it says Shnei Anoshim. If that, so therefore, I know we're talking about witnesses here. That's why we come back to you. Nema kan shnei, nema lahala shnei. Says it shnei anoshim, and later on says shnei edim. Malahala be'edim have come be'edim. So you have three different brises saying the same thing, but the bottom line is va'amlu shnei anoshim. The pasuk doesn't say edim; it says anoshim. So anoshim v'lo anoshim. However, the Gemara is a fourth brisa, which we learn another din altogether from this brisa. That's what we learned. That it's not coming out to tell you anoshim v'lo anoshim, tell you something else. You know what they come tell you? That they actually have to stand. That the Bala didn't have to stand. Now we just established that Shnei Anoshim are talking about witnesses. So what do you tell me now that Anoshim is talking about the plaintiff and the defendant have to be standing when they hear the final psak din or when the Eidim are giving a testimony? So so that's why they're trying to say the Gemara only brings the first part of the pasuk, but the word va'amdu we say is not only limited to the next two words shnei anoshim. It also goes on the next part asher lehem riv, that the defendant and the plaintiff will have the dispute. They have to be standing. So that's the view of the Chachamim. Comes along Rabbi Yehuda and he says, Shamaiti, I heard that they don't have to stand. If you go to the Torah today, you'll see that people are all sitting. They don't have to stand. And this is what I heard. What it means is that they both have to be doing the same thing. You can't give one better treatment and one less treatment. You want them both, the plaintiff and the defendant, to sit, they can. So what do you mean when it says that you don't want them to sit? There can't be that disparity between the two. You have to treat them both equally. One stand and one sit, that's intolerable. Or one guy we let him talk ad nauseum, and the other one we say, hey, it's like shorten your words. You can't in any way treat one of the litigants better than the other one. Sorry about me learning. Says the pasuk in the same vein. Rabbi Yehuda learns it from Amdu Shnei Anoshim. There's another brisa that learns a similar concept, but from a different pasuk. It says, "B'tzedek, with justice, tishpot amisecha, you should judge your friend." And the word amisecha is a word that's a bit rare. It's not the normal word we use. So we'll darshan soon that amisecha means am she'itcha, that someone like you, a talmid chacham, somebody who is learned. So first we learn out when we do justice, how should you rule justice? We don't want one guy standing, one guy sitting, or one guy talks as much as they want, the other one you say, hey, hurry up. Another pshat is that means have they done as has nothing to do with the court case. But every person that you see behaving a certain way, you should try to come up with some positive way, understanding that this person is not committing a sin. In fact, there's a big machlekes of shaynim. If this is the mitzvah of the Torah, this idea, it says a big of it's called don kol adam lekavschus. Is that just a nice ethical behavior, or actually it's a mitzvah in the Torah to judge other people lekavschus? Rabbi Yosef learned. And we dash what kind of words amisecha? It doesn't say reacha, your friend. It says amisecha. Am she'itcha b'Torah mitzvahs. That your nation that's with you in Torah mitzvahs, what it means, if he's a Talmid Chacham, hishtadlu l'doina yafa. You should judge him well. What do you mean judge him well? It means that, as the Gemara will explain, if there's a court case, you should hear his trial first, because every moment that the person that you're delaying their trial, they cannot concentrate on the learning, and therefore you're affecting their Talmud Torah. So you want to tell the story. Rabula he had a din. Kamed Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman was the Av Bezdin. He was also the son-in-law of the Reish Galusa, very powerful. And Rabula Bariloi had a din Torah in front of him. Shalach le Rabbi Yosef, he sent him a letter. Ula Chaveirenu, Ula, our friend, Amit b'Torah mitzvah. He's a big Talmud Chacham. Amar Nachman sat there and he thought to himself, why did he tell me that message? He wants to try to bribe me, and he wants me to bend the halacha or bend the din Torah in that person's direction. Hadram later Nachman realized what Rabbi Yosef was doing was lemishe betigra, tell him make his din Torah first. There are three opinions in the Rishonim actually how far we take this. Taish himself has two opinions here. One opinion is that if both cases come before the registrar at the same time, you should always listen to Talmud Chacham's case first. But if the other person's case came first, then once you decided to go proceed with the other case, you have to first listen to the other case before you go to Talmud Chacham. That's opinion number one. Opinion number two, Taish wants to say that no, that even if the other case came first, nevertheless, you have to try to prioritize the Talmud Chacham's case because the mitzvah of Kavod HaTorah is a mitzvah asay in the Torah, and therefore that gazams the other person's case. The third opinion says, even if you're in the middle of a case, you're already in the middle of a case with two people, and along comes a case with a Talmud Chacham, stop what you're doing and move to the case of Talmud Chacham, because the mitzvah asay of Kavod HaTorah overrides that. The other opinions I told you before, they say no. We have a rule, ha'oisig b'mitzvah potem min mitzvah, and like Rashi tells us in the Sukkot of Chafei base, that even if the other mitzvah is far greater than the mitzvah you're involved in, you don't stop what you're doing in order to go ahead and do the other mitzvah. So even though Kavod HaTorah might be a very big mitzvah, but since you're already doing this mitzvah here of listening to a din Torah, which is a mitzvah to listen to a din Torah, then you don't stop to start another mitzvah. So there's an interesting argument there, how far we take Kavod HaTorah. And we don't find any other precedent that if you're in the middle of doing a mitzvah, you have to stop to do the other mitzvah. And even though we have when mitzvah veris, a mitzvah that's passing by, if you don't do it right away, you're going to lose out. So that usually talks about priorities. So which one should I do? But you're already involved in a mitzvah, but you don't stop. And here, by Kavod HaTorah, one of you is that you stop even then. Interesting. So then he says, "L'mishrei betigra," to open up his case and let him hear first. Says the Gemara, "Inami," or l'shuda de daina. Shuda de daina is a concept we had in Bava Basra and Chesed Batim in a few places. Big argument, Rashi and Taisus, what exactly it means. There are cases where it's difficult to know how you should pass it. For example, a man died and he left behind a will, and the last will and testament said, "I'm leaving all my assets to Tuvia bar some other name." And in that city, there happen to be two people with the exact same name. How do you know which one it is? So we say, and they go to Bezdin. Obviously, each one claims that it's for them. So the Bezdin Shuddha Daina. Rashi Shuddha Daina means you have to try to put yourself into the mind of the deceased. And who do you think this deceased person would have given to? So you have to do a little homework, find out who was a friend of the deceased, who did a favor to the deceased, and then decide which one do you think the person would have done. That's Rashi. Rabbi Tam learns Shuddha Daina means literally to throw. The Dain could do whatever they want. They don't have to have any reason, any basis. They don't have to explain to anybody. They can decide to choose this tuvia, that tuvia, Shuddha the Daina. They throw it out there. So what he was telling him was that Shuddha the Daina, if you're trying to work out, which way to go or what to do, and you should know that this person is Talmud Chacham. So maybe there's a good reason that this person is the beneficiary because it's Talmud Chacham. Or Shuddha Daina means that the Yanim will throw. He's just alerting him to the fact that you're already dealing with the case of a Talmud Chacham. I want you to know that Ul is also Talmud Chacham, so therefore give them both equal treatment and make it your decision. Now says the Gemara further, Omar Ula said, this machlekes of Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. Rabbi Yehuda says they can both sit or both stand. Chachamim say they always have to stand, is only the baladinin. That's what we talk about regarding the litigants. I will be aiding regarding the witnesses. Witnesses always have to stand. When they give their testimony, they have to stand. It says, and we said before, anoshim are witnesses, and clearly the Torah says they should stand. It doesn't really say regarding Asher Lahem Ariv. So therefore, we have this argument. When's the machlekes? B'shas masa matan. The machlekes is when during the testimonies that they're giving. Avol b'shas gemar din. But when it comes to the final verdict, divrei hakol, everyone holds. Dayonin b'yeshiva When it comes to the final sentence, the final verdict, the people have to stand. And the chsiv, because it says in Pasuk, "Vayoshev Moshe lishbesa." Moshe sat there to judge the people. Vayamidam, and they all stood. So we see when it comes to Gemar Din, when it comes to the final sentence, everyone, the litigants, they both have to be standing, because remember they're lifnei Hashem, they're standing a courtroom. Hashem is there, and therefore they have to give the right, the proper their cheretz and the quorum. They should be standing. The same idea, but another lashon machlekes b'shas masamatin, when having the whole debate and everything else, but during when it comes to the final sentence, so that's exactly word for word we said before. But instead of bringing the proof from Moshe Rabbeinu's behavior, we're saying here because Eidim have to stand, and Eidim kigmar din dami. When Eidim are giving the testimony, it's like the gemar din. Now, sometimes we say that Eidim are tchilas din, sometimes gemar din. If you look through our Taisus and Shas in many places, you have different. Sometimes we say, in fact, in Laman and Aleph Taisus clearly says that Eidim are considered tchilas din. The Gemara says that Eidim is considered gemar din. So it depends. If we're looking at the case itself, we say, well, to receive the testimony, that's the tchilas din. You still have to go through the testimony, and you have to discuss between the dayanim themselves before you come to a conclusion. So the testimony of the Eidim is tchilas din. But if you're only isolating the Eidim themselves, their whole job is to give testimony, then they go home. There's nothing else to them, that's it. The testimony is over. They can't even amend it. They can't change it because so as far as they're concerned, their testimony is gemardin. That's the end of what they have to do. And that's how we reconcile all of these Rishonim and Tosfos. Anyway, so Gemara continues. Interesting that the halach is like Rabbi Yehuda, even though Rabbi Yehuda is a lone opinion, and that Chacham argue with halach Rabbi Yehuda. In fact, you go to Dit Torah today, you always have everybody sitting. Says the Gemara. So there's a story. The Visu, the wife of Rab Huna, a very interesting din over here. The wife of Rab Huna, Havele Dina, had a din Torah. Kamed Rab Nachman. She had some din Torah, some dispute with somebody in front of Rab Nachman. We said before he was a chief justice. Omar Rab Nachman said, I have a problem. We know that when Talmud Chacham walks into the room, you have to stand up. In fact, we had an ending more Makis. These foolish people that they stand up, for Sefer Torah, and they don't stand up for those who study the Torah, who are the ones who can decide what the Torah means. So I have to stand up. The wife of a Talmud Chacham, Eishes Chaver, you have to stand up as well. So they have a problem. You're not allowed to show any favoritism to one person over the other. If I stand up for one and not for the other, the other person, let's say the plaintiff, she was the plaintiff, so the defendant, for example, or the other way around, will feel, hey, I don't have a chance here. The judge is currying her favor. So what should he do? On the other hand, he has a mitzvah to stand up. A big machlek is Rishonim, whether the mitzvah to stand up for the wife of a Talmud Chacham is Mahat Torah. Those covered hat Torah is, because we said another Gemara, that usually it's the wives who encourage the husbands to learn Torah, so they get equal credit as if the husband, just like the husband does. So just like you have to stand up for the husband, you have to stand up for the wife. And they say it's Mahat Torah. After the husband passed away, then it's only Midrabban, because he's no longer around. Others say that even while the husband's alive, it's only Midrabbanan, but regardless, you have to stand up for the Eishes Chaver. If she's not a Talmud Chacham in her own right, if she's a Talmud Chacham in her own right, then she has the same thing, covered Torah. From her own perspective, we're talking about even if she's not a Talmud Chacham, as an Eishes Chaver, you have to stand up. So he's in a quandary. What should I do? Somebody said, "Hey, what should I do?" Stand up, the other person will suddenly lose, his ability to defend himself. Won't stand up for Eishes Chaver. The wife of a Talmud Chacham is equal to a Talmud Chacham. So what do I do? So he's very clever. He said, "Lishma." He said to his gabbai, "Do me a favor. In the middle of the court case, right before she walks into the room, or as she's walking in the room, say I want you to take this bird and throw it into the room. The shadi and throw it on me." So I'll stand up out of fright. The Eik will stand up. So everybody thinks I'm standing up because this bird is coming towards me. But really I'm standing up for her. Says the Gemara, how can he stand up for her? Didn't we learn? We just said, the whole machlek is about standing up or sitting down is only during the discussions. Remember, while the Talmud Chacham is standing there, you have to stand the whole time. So Rav Nachman would be standing there the whole time. So it's one thing to stand during the whole thing. He said, "Oh, more birds will come, whatever." But b'shas Mardin, we just said before Moshe Rabbeinu, when it comes to the final verdict, divrei hakol dayanim b'yeshiva, the dayanim have to sit, the baladin and baladim stand up. What's he going to do about this Eishes Chaver? So Gemara says what he would do is the Yossi, he would sit, command the Shodari Misan. If you're untied, and Haman, he would right away say those words, Ish pleni atazaka, Ish pleni chayiv. It looked like he was tying his shoes or something, and he was saying, you're chayiv and you're zakai. But he was really standing, so therefore, that's how he was able to do that. Rabbi Abuna said, you have to know that Rab Nachman's wife, we lived in Brachas and in many places, was a very tough woman. She was the daughter of Reish Galusa, and she gave Nachman a very hard time. Hence, Rab Nachman understood that you have to give a lot of cheres to wives. But
that means, that means that when they stood the whole time. It's not as though when a Talmud Chacham walks in the room, you stand on your feet for 1 second and you sit down. You're talking about standing for the whole time.
True. So it could be one or two things. Could be the Talmud Chacham was standing, that she didn't remember. We just said before that they have to stand, right? Either they both sit or they both stand. If for whatever reason they were both standing, then he had to stand the whole time as well. If a Talmud Chacham is standing, we say that a Talmud Chacham passes by, you stand up and then you sit down again. And we made a difference. We had to remember, you had a different condition. If the Talmud Chacham was your Rabbi Muvik, you're not your Rabbi Muvik, or it depends how great they are. But if they're standing and they haven't moved past you, they're standing right in front of you, then you have to stand. So that's what it seems to me. We're standing the whole time.
Okay.
That's what it seems. Rabbi Huna said, this Talmud Chacham, and an Amoritz. They have a case between them. By the way, I'm sorry to tell you, there's a big argument in the Shrein, a fascinating argument. We said before that Kol Kavod Bas Melech Prima. We had an argument. Can let's say a plaintiff have someone represent him, and that person should not be there. In other words, I hire a lawyer. I say, "Lawyer, you run my case for me. I won't even be there." Without, in other words, if I'm there, so we have all this discussion about having lawyers there to support you or not support you. But can I send someone in my place? They call it an antler. Can I send someone in my place to represent me? And there's a big machlekes is showing that most are against it because they say that this person can make up stories which are not true, and also there's what chance do you have at all of mediation because this person doesn't have anything from it, has nothing vested in it. On the other hand, there are others who say that if this will bring the case to a resolution, maybe you can. But when it comes to a woman, most poskim hold that she could have someone representing her to stand in her place and to run her case, even though she's not there. Others say that the bezin should send a shliach bezin to the person's house to get the testimony that they need and everything else, and not to rely on a third party to represent them. And one of the riots is to Rav Huna's wife, right here. Rav Huna's wife came to the court case. We just said before that generally women didn't come, but she came, didn't send somebody in her place. Anyway, something more further. Sorry. This Rav and Amoritz. The Islu din about it. So have a dispute. You have an Amoritz who whatever did some business with a Talmud Chacham, and they got into a fight. They tell the Talmud Chacham, look, sit down. Our derech don't sit down. And so too to the Amoritz, you say, sit down. And the reason is obvious, because otherwise the Amoritz feels he has no hope in the world. The rabbis all stick to each other, it's some union, and what chance do I have? So you're not going to show any favoritism to one over another, but on the other hand, a Talmud Chacham should sit, shouldn't stand, so therefore you can tell them to sit. The ikoi less laba, but if they're standing, there's no big deal. They can stand as well. Rav Barsh, so interesting. So why the Eishes Chaver Talmud Chacham should have just told her to sit down. Anyway, so the Gemara, I guess the problem there was because it came to the final sentence. And final sentence, you have to stand up, as he said before. Rav Bar Shravya, Rav the son of Shravya, Havli didn't come out of Papa, had it entirely before a Papa. Ois Vei, he sat down, Rav, but Ois Namad Baldin, he sat down also, the plaintiff. Also, shlicha the Beit Din. It came along the shliach of the bezin, the one who works for the bezin, and Butters Bey, he gave a kick to the Amma Oretz, as if, what a chutzpah you're sitting over here. And he made the guy stand up. The Papa did not say to the Amma Oretz, sit down. Hey, how can you do that? But Mistat Matanasi, the tiny that this person now will lose his ability to speak. He sees, hey, this is so unfair, so tilted against me. So they asked Papa, defend yourself, please. Amar Papa said, maybe Papa said, this is different. The rabbi said, sit down. Came along another person and told him, you better stand up. So I think that this person who had to stand up will say to himself, as far as the rabbi is concerned, I'm equal to the other one. It's this Meshuggah over here who made me stand up. He doesn't like me. He'll say to himself, the rabbi, Papa, he's good. He likes me. He told me to sit down just like the Talmud Chacham. It's a Shliach Bezin who doesn't like me. Again, Rav Huna's son Rabba said, "Hi, Tzubim Rabbanon." This rabbi, I'm honest. These don't have to speak with each other. If you don't want that this Tzubim Rabbanon, Talmud Chacham, should come in first and sit down, and then the Amoritz will walk into the room. Because when the Amoritz sees the Talmud Chacham sitting there and the rabbi and the justice sitting there, he'll think they're conniving with each other and in cahoots. And he walks out, he won't feel that he's getting justice. Should the Mezek command as if the judge is advising the Talmud Chacham what the Talmud Chacham should say. This is interesting. You don't say this. This is not said only if they didn't have a fixed share, they didn't have a Daf Yomi share or a Rambam share that they learned every day. Of the justice. It's not a problem because everyone knows the reason why he's there is to learn. Interesting, because I had it many years ago. There's a couple of people in Melbourne wanted I should adjudicate over in Torah, and then one of them disqualified me because I have a share with the other guy, and therefore it's disqualified me. Here's clearly in the Gemara here that just because the justice has a share with either plaintiff or defendant doesn't in any way disqualify that person. So think about it further. He'll say, they were learning Torah, they were having a share, nothing to do with the court case. And obviously, in those days, they had a lot of derech for rabbanim and judges, and they didn't suspect them unless they had really strong grounds. Another thing Rabbanon said, this rabbi, the Yad, let's say he knows testimony, so in other words, he could be an aid. He feels that it's beneath his demeaning for him to go and just to be there and aid and be interrogated. And the problem was that the Dayanim sitting on that bezin were a much lower stature than this Rav who was coming in as a witness. Because remember, as Dayanim, the two people who are involved in a dispute, they can choose anybody to be the Dayan. They don't have to be the qualified Dayanim. They can keep alive, they can choose anybody. And so this Talmud Chacham, who is now the witness, feels that these people are inferior to him, and he feels slighted to be there standing there, and they can interrogate him, and it's a bizarre for him. So the din is loy lazel. It doesn't have to go. The Torah says that if you loyagiv v'nos avoined, but the Talmud Chacham, this is sheval taisa, and the mitzvah of covered haTorah overrides that, as we'll soon see. We learned matzah sako kupa. We learned something similar. Because what's the problem if he withholds the testimony? One of the people that are going to be impacted monetarily, right? You're hurting somebody monetarily. But we have already a precedent for this that even though you can hurt somebody monetarily, it's not monetarily. If it's not my covet, I don't have to. We learned matzah sako kupa. Let's say you found a sack or you found a box, and the darker little. Let's say if it would have been your own, you wouldn't have taken it. How does it lead to have to be? Had also in the beginning there, if you're zucking, so we had more brachas. If you're zucking as well, if you would have been your own few cents, you wouldn't have been stooped down to pick it up. You don't have to pick up somebody else either. Either losing money, losing money. So it doesn't matter. So if you don't, so we see the same thing here. Adis, you can avoid going to the bezin to say Adis. Hani mila. This is all talking about when it's matters of money. I will be Yisura. If it's a question of Isser, as Rashi says. For example, a woman, she's an aguna, and what do you call it? And she wants to be free. She goes to Bezdin, and if this big Talmid Chacham knows that her husband is still alive, and therefore, if he comes forward and tells Ein Chachma, Ein Tvuna, Ein Eitzadeg Hashem. When it comes to matters pertaining to between Hashem, there's no Chachma to get around it. You have to go and do what you have to do. When there's a Chil Hashem, you don't give cover to a Rav. Okay. And even though we said that covered habrias is doicha aloisus shevatayda sheval taismed a few tests over there in brachas, that with covered habrias involved, if a sheval tais is just not doing something, we say don't do it. And so then the Shemar say it depends how big the genai is. By a mes mitzvah. By going to the mes mitzvah, you're not going to be able to bring your korban pesach or whatever it is. So nevertheless, because over there there's such a genai, have a mace lying around, we therefore we tell you go ahead and do things. And Rabbi Yemar. Have a Yodelis, he knew testimony the Mazutra. Rabbi Yemar knew something that he could support Mazutra. Also the Kamed Ameimar. So he went before Ameimar. So it's Yemar, Mazutra, and Ameimar. And they came for the Torah. He had everyone sit down, including the witnesses. Including Rabbi Yemar. Rabbi Yemar is a witness. And we know that witnesses, says, but have to stand. The whole debate of Rabbi Yehuda Chachamim was regarding the plaintiff and the defendant. They could both sit and so on. But the witness have to stand. And yet he had Rabbi Yemar, the witness, sitting. But when it comes to witnesses, how come you have to stand? He said, Hi Asay, the Hi Asay. It's a mitzvah say, right? The witness have to stand. But there's another mitzvah say that you have to give cover to cover that Torah. And therefore, because it says in Pasuk, Es Hashem Elokecha Tira, you should fear Hashem. We had this in Psachim, and we said, Shimon HaSunni. Every time it said Es, he darshan something, and Kivan Shegia Es Hashem Elokecha Tira. When he came to the Pasuk of Es Hashem Elokecha Tira, he Pirish. What do you mean Es Hashem? Who else is secondary to Hashem? Nothing else. And Rakiva came along, it says, Rabbi Talmid Chachamim. So that's we learn out the mitzvah of Asay of Kavod HaTorah for a Talmid Chacham. So we have two Asays here. Asay, the Kavod HaTorah, Adif. This Asay of Kavod HaTorah overrides the Asay of Amdush Noshim and let him sit. Torah Bamilan. Menayin, how do you know a dayin? How do you know a dayin? Shalayasis a negin ludvorav. Now we're going to learn a number of cases about midvar sheket tirchak, and it'll take us down to the next time. It's very interesting. We'll do a